Alright. So, I'll be going over the lead, and it has four components to it, which is what gives it its depth and body. Number one is just what I call the talk, which is a very sharp transient that sounds somewhat similar to a hi-hat. Its only purpose is just to make the initial hit of each note stand out and very sharp, without adding very much dynamics in as far as the melodic properties. It by itself sounds, it's just a simple hit. This was made before I was very pedantic about routing things. So some of the channels that are not routed, I've messed with the volume here, which you should never ever do. I don't really care for going back to this track and messing with it. People seem happy with it for what it is. So without any of the plugins, it's just very soft. My intention was to make it a bit wider. Well, it's not soft. The transient's still sharp. It just has no bite to it. And that's just some basic EQ and a saturator, which my saturator failed, and it doesn't really matter. Delay and reverb. The reverb is quite wet, something I might change if I actually went back and rehashed this track. And next is the saw. The saw also has a bass line going to it, which is the only one of the three leads that's going to have it. The saw typically runs at a slightly lower. I wouldn't say. I think it might even be an octave lower. I don't believe so, but anyways, here's the saw. Everything's drenched in reverb. Everything. This is. I don't remember why I named it Virus, but it does have an LFO running, a pitch bend LFO, at a very fast rate, which was what gives it its unique sound that stands out, even when everything's playing at once. It is the sharpest and grittiest of all the leads, and probably the most interesting as far as sound. I don't think I processed it very much. No, it's on the same routed track as the talk. So it's just pretty much a little bit of saturation, reverb, and delay. You can hear the pitch bend. I have a pitch LFO on both the parts of the track. Or I mean, both parts of the synth. My bad. Here's the last one, which is the most melodic. Now, this one, like I said, I probably should have routed this to a track. It's just loaded with reverb, and it has the reverb from the routed track as well as reverb built into the plugin. The reverb built into the plugin is a lot more dry, but has a longer sustain as opposed to the one I have routed together, which causes notes to bleed into one another, which adds for a pretty interesting effect. You can hear how long it takes to decay down. Altogether, it's almost hitting zero. Altogether, together, they sound great. individually, they sound very bad. That is a key component of sound design, and it's something that I try not to worry about too much. If the sound does not sound good on its own, you should probably mix things down once they are all layered together. And like, if you try to get something to sound good on its own, you might end up screwing. You likely will end up screwing the entire sound up. So find sounds that worked well together. If you're creating them, you always have to have your benchmark. My benchmark was the saw. The saw was the most simple to make. That is what I was going to have as my meat of the lead, which it isn't turned up as much as the others, but that was because it was the first component. Um, I then had the virus. This was when I was just screwing around and learning how to work with LFOs, and it ended up working very well with the saw. The euphoric came third when I realized that just those two together were not very. Um, the timbre of it was not very harmonic. It didn't work well. It wasn't big. I didn't want to have too much going on at the drop. I just wanted kicks in the lead to be as prominent as possible. So I had to add this. The talk was another issue where it was the initial hit of every note that was on a kick was being drowned out, so I needed something to accentuate the transient of each note, since um, making transients stand out on synths can be difficult because you can totally alter the entirety your of the synth, and I didn't want to have an extremely fast attack on a melodic note. And so I just decided it'd probably be better to add another layer to that. So that's the lead. Next is the kicks. The kicks is the most unorthodox thing in this entire track. To somebody who makes hardstyle, if you have an idea of how to make it, you'd be scratching your head right now. And it's because the sample that I decided to use when doing this did not work very well when being um, resampled and pitch shifted. So what I did is I have. This is really weird, and this is very, very complex to people who do not understand how music works. This may fly right over your head. So what I'm doing, it looks like a disaster, I know. And what it is I have every C note is playing the resampled note, but in order to shift it, I have it sliding to whatever pre-designated note that I had. And I would let the transient play, and then the actual bass, that sound is being um, pitch shifted. And if I had the um, pitch shifted note at the beginning of it, it would totally ruin the sound and hit of the bass, which would cause it to sound rubbery. Like instead of an actual hard hit, it would be like bow, bow, wow. You would hear the active pitch shift, and it does not sound good, and it does not sound powerful. So because of this, I allow the initial hit to be nice and snappy, and the pitch shift, the melodic aspects of the kick then come in afterwards. But hard style is hard style because you're adding a talk to the kick. The talk is similar to what you do with what I did with the lead, but this is a rule that every hardstyle song follows. Is your kicks are going to have a talk. The talk is where all of the upper high ranges, and there's a very sharp transient here, and they are tuned, so it's similar to like a sharp snare playing at the beginning of every kick. And without the talk, the kick sounds flabby and pretty awful. But you can hear the pitch shifting correcting it a split second after the initial playback of the sample. And with the talk, that totally drowns it over, which is intentional, which I do believe it is. The kick is side changed to the talk, and then the talk is sidechained to everything else to give it more space. Because remember, the lead was almost hitting zero, and if you want a very, very powerful kick to play at the same time, you'd either be clipping or one of the sounds is being drowned out. A lot of the lead is a much higher frequency, so we're not clashing for the same sound. But regardless of that, we want as much power in the percussion in EDM tracks. That is a goal that you should have if you're making an EDM tracks. Your drums, your percussion, your hits, they need to stand out. And together, they sound like this. And it's pretty crazy how just a simple hit with some high end can totally change the sound of this. I'll play it one by one again. So it sounds pretty awkward. Now together it sounds great. As far as processing, I have them both on the same channel, and what I did to it was probably a little too much. I have it saturated. I have camel fat, which is a filter modifier, which adds distortion. You can mess with filters. It's typically used for basses and dubstep and trap and certain things like that. Um, I have another channel for the kick effects, which I'll bring up later. Maximus for more like leveling and compression, a stereo shaper for stereo shaping, more EQ. I use parametric EQ typically for automations in EQ, and Pro EQ for very minute and complex things due to the scaling of PMEQ. G-Tune is also used to let me know what note is being played, because I do need to individually pitch shift each note, and there is some fine tuning, like by a couple cents within there, to make sure that everything is perfectly fine, because these samples, it really depends on what you are using whenever you're pitch shifting them, and that's just something that you need to figure out on your own when working with hardstyle. Um, if I mute everything here but the kicks and the lead, um, what's going on here is I'm just having stray kicks and um, the kick effects, the lead, and each lead has its own cutoff filter. All four of them, including the talk. And this is just, to add some variation on the track. I'll start it from 41 bars. Some CPU issues. I have a couple other things running at the same time, like 20 Chrome tabs, which should probably close out. Alright, now, these sound a lot more complex than they really are. The kick effects and the modulation going on. That is largely camel fat, which was the filter mod and the distortion. Um, if I turn this off, they sound very, very different. I have two different settings. One for a sustained distortion with a long reverb tail, and one is a filter modifier. You see? Listen to that. This is without either instance of camel fat. And now when I have them on, it'll take me too long to go into detail what I did with them exactly. One of them is a preset, one of them is pre-made. Camel fat does have presets. Um, Even though, presets in the drums sometimes sound pretty awful for drums and will actually sound pretty good for lead. Don't really, unless you're going to be making hardstyle and maybe some like complex tro, you don't really need camel fat for anything. But when I have both instances on there, here, I'm going to mute them one more time, and here's what they sound like. This is no camel fat. with just slight processing. That's a lot of delay, reverb, some compression, and a little bit of saturation. Pretty much what I did with everything else, and it's the same um, effect chain that I added onto the regular kicks to add some uniformity. Nice and powerful, nice and odd too. Now, with Camel Fat, with the automations that are a filter and one is a I have this automation linked to two macros. One of them was the filter modifier and the distortion amount. And here we are once we're playing with Camel Fat on. It's pretty crazy, huh? I love Camel Fat. This is something that I learned when working with hardstyle. Just I was trying to learn how to make these effects, and I was really surprised in just my first attempt how good it sounded. Um, Now beyond the kick and the lead, let's mute all of that. The beginning of the track. The beginning of the track I made mostly with Nexus. Nexus is a ROM puller, so it is running samples that you can then edit yourself. It is not a synth generator. You do not create the sound. You only edit a predetermined sound. So a lot of the sounds at the beginning of the song I did not make. This was one that I did though. This was made with another synth. At the beginning of the track I have a cutoff. Simple, simple. Here are the strings that was made with Nexus. It's 3 different layers, and each has a cutoff filter. And making automations with an Nexus is difficult. If anybody wants to learn that at a different time, just ask and I can teach you. It's like I said, I didn't make any of these sounds. I just found some good sound design, and I found that these 3 work together. And this pattern plays out like this. So beautiful, so smooth. This is probably one of my favorite sound, like my favorite part of the entire track. It's when I was creating the track, I was actually having it more down tempo and softer, but down tempo and soft doesn't sound very good with aggressive kicks. It does not. So I decided to make this track very, very wavy in its energy, having it constantly building up and then sloping down and building up and sloping down. And I think that's why this track is probably so powerful. I mean, popular. It's constant shift in energy while being very melodic simultaneously. So the first two, I'm gonna play them one by one. The first two are running the same uh, notes, and this third one stands out some. I'm not good with terms, unless it's very technical things, so bear with me. Here's the first set of strings. And here's the second. Oh, yeah, they actually are different. I remember now. There's a lot more progression in these. These are just longer sustained notes. And they're a lot more subtle. It's just, I don't really know how to explain what I was thinking. This was like a year and some change ago, and I do everything by ear. I don't have any experience writing, reading, making music. I just do things by ear. And I like to put little subtle nuances in things. And I choose, a lot of time I'll start with something, then add on to it, and then add on to it, but I don't have the sound decided. I keep going through sounds that actually fit my composition, which is why I think this was successful. It's a very time-consuming technique, but if you have an idea of what you're looking for, then it's a breeze. So I'll just play it. This one has a larger stereo range over the first one, which will cause it to stand out a little bit more when I play them back together. It's something that it is so much more subtle compared to the first one. I should actually probably turn it up some and this one down. Like I said, you should be doing this with the mixer. I just didn't really do that at the time because I was still fairly new to making music then. I just had a lot of good tools at hand together. This follows the bass, but at longer notes. Something's wrong. Hmm. I just changed that. I guess I was having a malfunction with the plugin. I don't really know what it was intentionally supposed to be. I was just sort of changing it right then and there to fit everything else. I'll have to go look back on that. I don't know what was going on there, but anyways, we can move on. I'll play them all together. Alright. Now the chords. The chords are something that I learned when I had a trance fit. I tried to learn trance, ended up not really liking the genre, so I kind of gave up on it. It's same old deal. It's running a cutoff filter at the same rate as everything else. I do not recall this being layered, actually. I think this is just... Oh, it's two. Okay. So, I'll play it together. I'll play the entirety of it, actually. Here. Kick ass, huh? Alright, so what was going on is I only had one of them that was playing on every off note. That was the one that was rising. As soon as the second um, pattern kicks in is where I have the cutoff ending. And I'll play it back without the cutoff filter engaged. And here is just the main chords. tinkered with some 8-bit sounds, courtesy of Nexus, and a mallet pad to play that. This is the more fun build-up of the track, which I had a volume and cutoff filter here as well. Video game sounds. Now the thing about Nexus is that you can actually tune and adjust individual layers within every synth. I have 4 different layers within the synth there, and then having it play back with the video game sounds. Layers, layers, layers. It's how you make your track sound interesting. Simple stuff. Here is a bass line, which was pretty wacky because I have a bunch of things going on at once, and I'll start with this one. I actually don't even remember which each one is. I'll figure it out as I go. And it's clipping, so yeah, there's a volume and envelope that I muted somewhere. Oh yeah, so this was, I totally removed all other elements and left in a like a glass gliss and added a metric fuck ton of reverb onto it. And here's a swell. This has a very, very fast, slow attack. So together, it adds like a bouncy effect between the basses. What's the sound? This was just to add some more space and some mid-range to it. Together, big mess. I have another cutoff filter here. This variation of that bass line is different because it's a little build up here. I have a LFO running a pitch on one of them and another cutoff filter that's supposed to be a little wacky to make it a tad odd. Here, I'll play it back. I'll have to play it through the track though. And by doing so, I'll have to mute everything else. Yeah, it was actually running a flanger, not a pitch shift LFO, but a pitch shift LFO is what I like to do. This was before I really had a definitive style, but you know, still kind of keeping true to what I do now. This is the like the airy sounding guitar that I use right before every drop. I'll just choir that's in the background that isn't as loud. More of a pad than anything else. And what's next? Oh, yeah, there's just basic sub baseline that runs. Here's the actual beginning of the drop itself. This problem with this track, there's so much going on that even despite having a very strong computer that should be able to handle this, some things aren't optimized and there's so much going on, so many different plugins playing at once that it begins to clip, and that is one of the issues with very complex music is sometimes you just have to keep rendering and rendering and rendering things until they sound right. I will have to constantly smart. What's running that's taking up space? Nothing. FL Studio is taking 100%, and OBS is struggling right now because I didn't want to record this at 240. I could probably get a capture card because this sucks. Anyways, let's just deal with it. I don't think I'd have this problem if I hadn't had OBS running. You might be asking, what is that distorted sound? Well, that is, my friend, is saturation. Saturation through compression. Saturation is adding distortion that adds timbre harmonics to frequencies that a sub normally wouldn't hit. So I can just slap an EQ on this real quick and let you visualize it. Typically, a sub would not sound like that. It would sound something more like this. See, there's so much harmonics here that I had cut out. And if I just mute everything but the harmonics itself, you'll hear exactly what I mean. It's a grit. It adds a grit and harmonics to the sub, make it more interesting. It's somewhat subtle, but it adds more depth and width to the sub itself to keep it from being a totally boring sound, which is subtle at first, but and you'll notice a lot once I point stuff like that out. So now I don't have that filter on, the EQ's turned off. Here's the distortion. And now with other things, like I don't know what, I'll have to definitely turn things off to keep it from clipping. My computer's hitting its limit, so it's just the strings, chords, and sub. Yes, that's my favorite part of the track right there. I fucking love that. I'm really impressed with myself thinking of that. Um, I had just cut off a beat of everything and had some empty silence as a build up right here, a vocal chop sample that I made. Um, Colossus voice. Something I made with Deep Blue Glitch and just editing a vocal sample and changing it up, re-rendering it till it sounded good. Another thing that I used in Hearts, I'll go over my samples and other things like little nuances throughout the track. But the drop here is fucking kick-ass, and I'm glad I thought of that. And I kind of made everything on like the first few attempts. It just sounded good, and I was something I normally to this day would spend hours working on, but I just kind of winged it, and there we go. I'll play it again. I'll go over the samples soon. Here is another cutoff filter. I did that a lot because I was learning how they worked, and I just abused it and milked it dry. But I even did it with the bass. So that was going on with the lead. This is the beginning of the build-up, right after the drop. So what I did, which was to add some variation, is that as I have it allowing more frequencies in on the bass, I have it cutting out frequencies on the lead. So then as soon as it drops over here, that's another part where everything's playing at once, so it's gonna struggle. Um, it goes back to what I had over here, where a lot of stuff is cut out from the main lead. Um, except with some different variation. And over here, I have a cutoff filter, basically just muting everything in the lead except this one synth, which is the euphoric synth. Then this one, I have it pulling down on them, so they're each one of them is still playing back, but they're limited in the frequencies that they play, building up the synth. It's louder than it was here at that beginning of the first part of the drop, and now on the second part, you have even more parametrics of it working. And then we have another drop right here. It's another 2 beats of silence this time to have a more complex kick sequence, because this is when we bring in the kicks. Yep, filter and pitch modulations as well as some distortion added some pretty kick-ass effects. Alright, here we are. That is the first half of the first third of the track, basically, where I went over the kicks, the kick effects, the lead, its filters, the bells, strings, and chords, as well as the basses. This is the unique part of the track where I actually have 2 different basses playing at once, where one is conflicting but one is sidechained to the other. Why it's so clever, because once the sub kicks in, now that distortion that I put on, the saturation, is much more prominent. That's the other offbeat bass line. It doesn't have any frequencies below like 80 hertz, which is a lot of where the sub is very, very prominent. So even though they're 2 basses and they're fighting for the same frequencies, they go together perfectly. And it's a largely in part of my cutoff filter working as well to keep volume levels in check. right over here, and it's active on over there. so it should be kicking. So I'll just go back on what that did. I had a very, very quick build up on the cutoff, as well as a time shifting. That's something that I do right before dropping a couple different sequences, but like adding variation, I think it's time consuming, but it's something that you definitely won't regret in your like final playback of tracks. This is the here's something that I have playing during the actual hook. It's just a side chained lead, or not a yeah. It's a false side chained lead. False side chaining is usually just a volume filter, and it doesn't really need to be paired with anything else for it to take place. If you're running FL Studio, is can be easily done through Grossbeat. If you're using anything else, you could just make a volume automation for it, and it's simple. And I'll show you exactly what it is. You'll hear this effect going in EDM and pop all the time. Now, again, it's another multi-layered sequence, which it has, well, through Nexus itself, I, just made it, and I also turned one of the oscillators into a white noise generator, which is why it has so much going on in the really, really high end, like 17K and plus. You'll hear what I mean once I like filter out frequencies. That's good enough. So at that range, there's really not a whole lot going on in dynamics. It's just to add space. It's space that neither the lead is really taking up nor the kicks. So it's just, to take more space up in the frequency range, which is why this track sounds so full. A lot more full than a lot of my other tracks, but this is probably the least technical one that I've made beyond the kick the kick and its modulations. This is a very, very compositional bass track, which is not the norm of things that I typically make because I typically make very, very complex and technical music. Um, so what sidechaining is it's just ducking the volume down very rapidly, ducking it down, bringing it back up equally, almost quite as fast as you brought it down, which gives it that kind of sound that you'll hear a lot if you begin to pay attention to music critically. And and then I'll take us to the end of the hook into the drop off, the bridge. So we'll go through this one at a time. Well, actually, before I do that, I actually skipped my samples for the first part of the track. And this guy, I have a lot of uplifters, downlifters, and crash sequences. There's a downlifter at the beginning of the track, and then there's that woman saying, "Oh yeah," at the beginning of the song. and this is a crash. This is the transition sequence from high energy to low energy and making it very breathy, and I just did that by overloading this sequence of the track with white noise and like ambient, long-lasting and heavily reverb-drenched parts of the track. So I had an issue here when rendering the track, so I just had to record the hard chords, and they are muted here, and I actually have them playing back down here. I don't remember what the issue was. I just remember it being a pain in the dick. I could still play it back through here, but I'll just likely play the sample and show you what the MIDI is. This here, I believe, that is just another ambient sound. Oh yeah, this was something that I added in the last day of my working on it. I'll mute some of these, some of these, some of these, and I'll play that. This is just made for, make it sound more interesting. See, it's only really heard right here, like transient note, and it's drowned out by the white noise and everything else, which is fine, and it's only really detectable if you really search for it. favorite part of the track is right here. It's this I don't even know what I do to this day. All I remember is that when I rendered the track, I actually have a sequence of this track where it's just like this, where is it? This part of the track, and that's it, just looped, because this is just the best sequence in the entire track. Maybe I think I started it from right here, actually, because it wouldn't make sense to just have one bar play just for, you know, musical matters. Right here, this drop, it was more of a transition, but it has the intensity of a drop, and I fucking love it. So what's going on here is kick effects, which I'll play individually. There's a bunch going on. The kick effects aren't playing back the same way that they were when I initially released it. I don't know if it's something that's been changed here, but or maybe it's just it could be where the placement of the LFO, which changes where things are placed down on the actual track. That's something that's negligible because it still gives the same effect, just at a different rate. It's essentially the same thing. Um, Camel fat just affecting the kick sounds and to this day, I make very complex drops. This is where I have the most fun in my tracks. What's going on here is, like I said, I had to chop up this bleed here. I could probably unmute it, and I don't want it to play back on this. Um, this is, I think if I play it as a pattern, it'll play back. Here. This is just a bunch of big leads. One of them I made in cylinder, the other two are. I think one of them is massive as well. Now it's gonna play it without the. All right, so what I'm gonna do is just play the sample, and where does it start? Here. Let me just play this one right here. We're gonna be listening to that, but that's one synth. Here's the other. follows a similar progression to everything else, just in trance chords and nothing more to it beyond that. What's going on here on this last sequence is um, different cutoff filters for each sound, and then I have a oof, oof, a gross beat automation beyond that, working with the sharp change in cutoff, which is how we get this guy right here, which is that here. I'm sorry, I've probably spent too much time here. This choir, I totally glanced over. This is something I made with Contact. It's a bank called Voxos, which is the different recordings of like choir people, and this one I just got a boys choir, and 4 different instances of it. And so, yes, this was an absolute CPU horror, which is why I had to render it and not actually have the Contact itself here. Um, I don't believe I have the MIDI either. I can find it. I do know I have it somewhere, just not within the track itself. It's let's just play this guy back. Yeah, now it's coming back to me. I also had an instance of Nexus with a lead playing back on it. I kind of wish I saved this in the final result. It's understandable why I didn't do it with Contact, because that that plugin chain itself was like 40% of my CPU on top of everything else because of Contact. Because Contact. And I'm sure I've made notes. I always make notes for myself of where I can find it. But that that is playing along with the side chained lead, and together they're side chained at the same attack and release and rate for some uniformity. Uniformity isn't the real word. It's just it's a word that I like to use when things work well. With all the lifters and the beginning of the hard chord, you can see its energy pick up very, very quickly, but not very abrupt, which is the one thing that I think I did 100% right on this track, and I wish I could give old me a pat on the back, is that every transition is not um, so swift and abrupt, and it's predictable, but the amount of energy when it actually comes through is not. So the song always keeps you on your toes. ravecore song without claps. This is the bread and butter of the track right here. These claps, these claps that I layered. This is the song. This is what got you Skaia at Infinitum. Just claps on every beat. You're welcome. Uh-oh, looks like we just had a stroke. Did Sealant stop responding? A, A, A. Uh-oh. I think something just went dead on me. Yep. This is one of the only parts of the song that I kind of regret, because this was done a couple days before I actually released it. Um, Composition sounds good, and I probably should have added unique sounds here rather than just reusing old ones that I had already put in, but I did this because of a lack of CPU usage. I'll just play it back. Well, with the filters there's a little error right there for probably since the render. This is just a copy of the track, so I really don't give a shit about it. Um, I have many different copies and some with subtle changes. This is just a throwaway, so some things aren't going to work out. Like this tape stop right here. It didn't work well. based on where I started the track. It is still good. Yeah, so this is a different little lead with things to back it. I had the collapse, the alternate bass line. So I'll just start with like the secondary miscellaneous things. I'm missing a file that was in here, which I'll have to find. I couldn't find it when I was loading in the track, but I think it might have been rendered in. It's the vocal chop. This is the part where I have the vocal chop. Unfortunately, that file might be gone, and that's why there's that little gap right there. It fucking sucks because it was pretty cool too. Um, well, there goes that. That's I'm legitimately bummed. Anyways, let's move on. And well, actually, I don't really need to. This I've just doubled up on the hook. Add a little bit of variation in there, nothing special, just double kicks. I did add another layer in the lead, which is another one that I made through Cylant. This is it right here. Enough heart attacks. You're okay, computer. Calm down. Alright, so another tape stop right here, which, let's start it from right here so it'll trigger properly. Or you can have another heart attack, that's fun. That's cool too. I like heart attacks. They keep you on your feet. Alright, here is the, resolution of the track.
Thank you for trying this demo.
Yep, so that's the watermark for Cylinth. Like, I've been using the cracked version for 2 years, like a month after I started making music, and it's just started doing this like last month, and I don't really know what to do to stop it. It's never really done this ever. I know why it's doing it. It just hasn't fixed itself. Anyways, here's the resolution of the track. Yeah, I kind of wish it wouldn't do that. Sorry, but this is about as good as it's gonna get, I think. Um, I'll go through what's going on here, of course. I have just kicks at the end. Something ain't right. I believe this is the cylinder that's giving me the demo issues.
Thank you for trying this demo.
Yep. And so it's not playing back. Here, I know how to do this now. I'll have to save this preset. And that's Skaia ad infinitum. This is a long, lengthy video, I know. This is a long, lengthy track. With too much bullshit going on. So, there you go. That's the gist of it. If you have any questions, just let me know. I can answer them. I can provide midis. I can provide anything. I don't really care. This song's really not going to be popular beyond the few Homestuck remnants. So, I mean, it's going to be on my personal album, but it's always going to be known as Skaia ad infinitum, which I really don't. I think this might be the one track when it's going on my personal stuff that I do not rename. I think this name is here to stay because it fits. And yeah, there we go. Peace.